you know, I was like, I'm not giving up my dream. So I was homeless for a while, but then I got, back on my feet, went to community college. I remember my guidance counselor, and keep in mind, I had straight A's. I had a high GPA. They said my GPA was high enough to get into Harvard. But I went to my guidance counselor, and I remember she said, "Get ready for pumping gas, because that's all you're ever going to do." When I moved to New York City, everything I owned was in the backpack. I had a motorcycle. That was it.
So for anybody who's listening, just if you can give us a little background about you, what do I have to know about you to understand where you come from, the type of artist you are, and the things you've done?
My background, like, I had a really conservative, really Christian military parents, and everything was, going great until about high school, when typical teenage rebellion kicks in, and my dad kind of didn't understand why you're not like his cadets. Like, he was in Vietnam, he's been in every war, and then first they got in the middle, they get into punk rock, and then, that's very taboo to them. And I wanted to be an artist, and, they're all about that, but they didn't like what I draw, which is mainly horror-based stuff and darker stuff. But living in Florida was awesome, because it was like white trash, northern Florida, but it was a college town, so they had like a lot of bookstores and stuff. So, and there were a lot of like indie artists in the bookstore, so I get critiques from them, and I get feedback from them. So I just always wanted to be an artist and a writer. And then we moved to Northern Virginia, and things got worse with my parents. They kicked me out of the house and moved. But I was like, I'm not giving up my dream. So I was homeless for a while, but then I got, back on my feet, went to community college, and moved to New York to make it.
That's awesome. That's a very interesting story, and I want to start from the very beginning as far as like the support when you have as an artist, really. So what I mean by that is a lot of artists nowadays, when they choose to be an artist, or they choose to be a photographer, a painter, things like that, they don't get that support, right? And you witnessed it yourself, where it's like, people say it's just a hobby, you're not going to get anywhere, it's not going to pay you real money, right? Or things like that. But then,
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, exactly. But then you seeing people out there just actually making it. You see like famous artists like Picasso and things like that, right? So, how did you find that support? Did you ever have any self-doubts? Did you ever have any things where just like, is this really meant for me? And how did you kind of overcome that?
Well, fortunately, everything I wanted to do, people fought against. So I'd be used to like getting lots of no's. Like, I remember my dad chasing me around the house with scissors when my hair got too long. I pierced my ears, but I'd have like, whereas in the house, I'd have like a little string there to like keep the hole. And I remember him like trying to yank that out, and, it didn't go good. It didn't go good at all. But I'm used to people saying no. And like, I was a punk rocker in Virginia in the early 90s, when having, green hair and mohawk was not cool. So you got tons of shit. So I just got used to like, I'm going to do my thing and fuck everyone else. I don't know if I could curse on your podcast, but
You're good. You're good. Just free zone.
yeah, so nobody really, like, I remember my guidance counselor, and keep in mind, I had straight A's. I had a high GPA. They said my GPA was high enough to get into Harvard. So, and the reason I'm saying that is not to brag. I'm just saying, like, I think a lot of teachers would have thought I had potential. But I went to my guidance counselor, and I remember she said, "Get ready for pumping gas, because that's all you're ever going to do." I was like, wow, well, fuck you. So I just kept doing my thing. I remember I got kicked out of art classes for doing horror, which my art teacher said that's not a career. I got kicked out of creative writing class for basically writing horror. And but I just kept doing my thing. I was like, either I'm going to make it, or, fuck everyone else, this, this is what I want to do. I don't want to be stuck like Dilbert in some job at like office space, or I hate the world. I hate what I'm doing. You just got to keep at it.
What was one of those things that you first approached, one of those projects that you first approached that, out of so many doubts, out of so many people telling you no and that you couldn't do it, that they didn't like your work, what was the first project you ever approached that was like, hey, I'm getting somewhere, people started realizing that like, hey, he has potential, or he is making it? What was that first project like for you, and the emotions that were running through you?
Well, there wasn't one project. It was kind of like a slow burn, but it's like there were people that were like Yeah, man, yours great. I mean, they weren't giving me money, they weren't giving me like big contracts, but they liked my artwork. I did a lot of artwork for like bands and like, painting local punk rockers jackets and stuff like that. And so you get a lot of accolades, but you don't get any money. But I think the first time I made consistent money was I moved to New York. Again, I was doing like book and magazine and like all sorts of stuff, but it paid very minimal, you know. And then I started tattooing, and then I was making regular money. But I was like, wait, I can tattoo to pay the rent, but I can do art on the side. So like I bring like paintings to my tattoo shops. I work on the painting while I was waiting for someone to come in and want a tattoo.
And then that's interesting because you a lot of people don't have like the fancy gimmicks of like the tools or the gear to do what they want to do, right? And so a lot of people believe that they need that stuff. You didn't have that, but you made it with what you did. Is that kind of how it went? Like you believed in your dream, you believed in what you wanted to do, that you did
Yeah.
whatever it took.
Well, it's like they make a joke like, yeah, I tattoo, and they say even if you have the worst machine, but you know what you're doing, you can do a good tattoo with it. Obviously, better tools help you make better artwork, whether it's tattoos or paintings or drawings or whatever. But it's like you can make something work, and like I figured that art supplies are important. So I'd buy like decent inks. I'd buy like decent brushes. Like if I had like work extra or sell something, or I remember like surviving on ramen noodles and rice and tuna fish. But it's like this is important. So either I can not make it or I can try.
How was that? How was that time span for you when you were doing that, when you were trying to make it because you really believed in your dream? How was that, like the difficulty of it?
It well, I kept trying. Like the main thing that was difficult was just not getting like a consistent, decent paying gig. So like I did everything like telemarketing. I did door to door Greenpeace. I was a bike messenger for a year. But I kept plugging away at it, and like I did covers for like Maximum Rock and Roll and stuff like that. And then I tell people, and then some people, whether your artwork is good or not, they can just go, that's not the style I like. But then some people would be like, hey, that's great. So I'm like, wait, if somebody likes it, maybe if I just keep trying, I'll find the right person, and then I'll break out. It helps that you hear all these stories about like people like, Brad Pitt like slept in his car for months. There are lots of artists that like they just didn't make it, and then all of a sudden,
What is, I guess, what was that turning point for you? What was that point where you really did something that was like, hey, like the collaborative book, the one that you mentioned? How was that process like? How did you start getting people that actually started appreciating your artwork, and how did that feel for you when you started putting out projects that were like that were actually that you started seeing the pros to it, the benefits of it?
well, yeah, I mean, it's great the minute that anything comes out that like that you feel is a big deal. Like I remember I did a cover for the band Coalesce, they're one of my favorite bands, and I just went to them. They played a show, and I brought my portfolio to the show, and afterwards I cornered Sean Ingram and I'm like, "Hey man, I'd love to do artwork for you guys." So you got to push yourself. But, so like I probably talked to like 10 bands, and like one of them would say, "We love your stuff." But, once you get something out there, like I got a cover for them out there, that was great. I remember Madcap Magazine, I did political cartoons for them. So every time something would come out, you're like, I made it, I'm in. And then, of course, you didn't. You got something out there.
What was some of like the, I guess, the resources that you you started getting familiar with, people that started helping you out, that that you wish you had when you first had gotten started?
Well, I remember so when I was in Northern Virginia, like all the artists who worked at like, indie bookstore and comic shops and stuff like that, they gave me a lot of great feedback. And like every day I'd be like on my drawing table, like working on comic books, because at the time I was stuck on being a comic book artist. And just all the great feedback they gave me, that really helped. I finally went to art school, and I had a great teacher. I don't even know the guy's first name, but we all called him Mr. Thomas. And he was like a controversial black artist from DC at the time. And, so he put stuff in there, and it'd be so controversial. Like for the Wondergate Motel, they did some exhibition, and he did like a soldier running through Vietnam shooting his gun, but his gun was cocked, and so then they were like outraged that they pulled it. But then because he's like a black artist and DC's like 98% black, they're like, oh shit, now we're getting all this negative feedback. So then he gets back in. But he was great because, as a teacher, nothing I did was too controversial. He just concerned himself with whether you worked hard on it and whether you did a good job or not.
That's one of the questions I have for you as far as like when going back to the art school. When you're entering the creative field, that's something that I've always had like a struggle and understanding with different guests that we've had is do you for yourself see that going to school for arts or creativity is worth it, especially when you're being, I guess, judged by or giving a grade point on your artwork? A lot of the times, like I've went through that where it's like people are giving you like bad grades on like art that you thought was really good. How do you see that perspective of like going to school for your creativity?
Well, I think Mr. Thomas was great. The thing is this, like I started doing art. I took like advanced art classes in school and stuff. So I figured, I don't really need to go to art school. Like I wanted to go, but I had no money. Like I worked as a dishwasher and a busboy and stuff. I just didn't have enough money to pay for it. So when I finally decided that, if I'm really gonna make a serious go for this, I gotta go to school. I went to community college, and that I could afford. Like I had a motorcycle. I'd like, how hard it is to balance art supplies on a motorcycle driving to art school, but you got to make it work. And like, I was like, I'll just give it my all. Cause I mean, if you don't make it, nobody cares. Like the only one that cares if you make it is you. So it was like, and it really helped. It really helped having, Mr. Thomas because he wouldn't, and I think all school helps you with this. He would like help you refine your technique. He didn't try like make you do what he wanted to see. It was more like, yeah, well, you need to work on perspective with this. You need to work on anatomy with this. Probably for everybody, for like musicians, it's like, you'll learn how to sing better and like sing from your chest instead of like, stretch your vocal cords and stuff like that. So like all the little minutia really helps. It really doesn't help when you have it. I had this experience with like advanced art classes when they judge the content of your work instead of trying to help you along.
You mentioned Mr. Thomas a lot, your art teacher. How was he a big role model to you and keeping you going? It seems like you've had a lot of struggles that you've been through, but you always managed to get through it. You always try to make the best of it. How was he a big impact on you and on helping you achieve the things that you wanted to achieve?
Well, he did like what he does is what I take is like what I should do now. Like I try and do this with other people. So for instance, I remember he wanted us to do everything really big. So there was one thing where he had us do this giant, illustration, and he put it up in front of the class and critique it. But instead of like deriding you and talking down, like at first he starts out with the good points. He's like, oh, I like how you did this. I like how you did that. I like, your perspective. And then he would say, but you need to work on perspective. You're like, what? So, but he starts out by complimenting you, and then he brings in the advice on top of that. That really helps because he starts out with your strengths. So you're already on a high step. Instead of you feeling like, resisting, you feel like you let him down.
And then now you see that kind of like the compare and contrast be like from like somebody who actually really supports you, tells you the advice that you need to hear rather than like when you first got started and you didn't have that, right? But like you kind of kept it going. That's something that I really like to put an emphasis on because as soon as somebody hears something negative about their artwork or them not being able to make it, they automatically give up or they pursue something else when they were actually a really good talent, right? And so do you see that kind of like comparing contrast of like the support and how that kept you going versus like in the beginning when you didn't have that but you believed in yourself?
Well, a lot of people do that. They just give up because you get like I think what really helps is if you get somebody like Mr. Thomas who like he believes in you. He helps you along, and he just wants to make you better. And you can feel that. You can feel that he has a real energy there. Where it's like I remember I had another art teacher in high school. I took like an advanced art class, and like I do horror, and he's like, "Oh, that's what my ninth graders do. You'll never make money doing horror." I was like, what about Stephen King? He's like, oh, shut up. He's my favorite author. I'm like, well, there you go. But he got me kicked out of his class. But, yeah, that didn't help. So I think, I mean, you got to believe in yourself, but you got to be able to take criticism. And it really helps when you're like in that like adolescent phase, if they compliment you a little bit, because you're a little bit sensitive.
Nowadays, like kind of touching to that. Nowadays, it's as an artist, how do you find opportunities? And I think that's something that like a lot of our listeners love hearing is how do you as a creative, as an artist, like how do you find more opportunities for yourselves to get your work out there, especially on the side of monetizing it? Now you see things like in the digital space, right? Like how do you go about finding those opportunities?
Well, I'm not gonna pretend it's easy because it's not. It's really, really hard to make any sort of living off of or art or writing or anything creative. You just got to keep at it. Like if you keep at it, and you've got to be willing to do plenty of free work. I'm not saying nothing but free work. Definitely don't pay to do stuff, but if it's a really cool project and it'll put your name out there, do it. Like there are bands that they pay me way less than a normal like Illustrator fee, but I was like, it's a really cool project, and by being involved in that, they'll probably help me get other opportunities.
And it's mostly kind of like that networking, right? Like if you meet one person that's going to help you connect to another person, it's like you're going from A to B to C instead of like a lot of people try to jump from A to Z and they think by doing something that they're going to reach the level that they're at, they get disappointed and they don't reach that, but it's more of like kind of keeping on building yourself, right?
Yeah. You just gotta keep at it. If you believe that you have something, you need to like put everything into that and keep pushing. Like I remember, like for instance in tattooing, like I went through my like 15 minutes of fame in tattooing, where I was like in all of the magazines. Like I do convention in Europe. I had people that pay for my plane flight, give me a place to stay for free. I'd have a free booth at the convention and stuff. But what that started with is every single magazine that I could possibly get myself into, I submit. I didn't care if there were 3 readers. I kept putting out there and bombarding people, just putting out there. And eventually they go, oh, all right. And then it's weird because it's almost like magic. Like, for the longest time, nothing seemed to happen. All of a sudden, everybody was on it.
If you can go back for a little bit and tell your younger self when you were first starting something, what would you tell your younger self?
I would say, like, don't give up so easy, because there were plenty of times when I was just like, oh, well, fuck them. They don't like my stuff, and you kind of get discouraged and go away. Like, I know this, especially from tattooing, like a lot of people want an apprentice. And so they come in, they're like, I want an apprentice. And like the people that approach it better, like bring a portfolio of their artwork and stuff. Like some people just come in and they talk, and you're like, you're not really trying. You're not convincing me, because I feel like taking on a apprentice is like taking on a kid. You've got to dedicate yourself full time to. So there are a lot of people that will just tell you no right straight off the bat. And I know when I was applying to comic companies, a lot of the comic companies will say no straight off the bat. Just keep at it. Like keep going back to the same comic shop, keep it submitting to the same, or keep going back to the same tattoo shop, or keep submitting to the same comic company. Like there are lots of people that like since there's like I think Frank Miller had this experience. Like all the big names that people know of today, they probably submitted it like 20 times until finally the company's like, yeah, we'll take a chance on you. And if they're really good, they're gonna shine.
Was there any like sacrifice that you really had to make? Maybe it was like a point where you were just like, I don't know if I should do this or not, but you took the sacrifice and it was so worth it. What was that moment for you?
There were probably a few. Like moving to New York City. Like when I moved to New York City, everything I owned was in a backpack. I had a motorcycle. That was it. I had a friend who lived in Queens. He was going to rent me a room, and I had no job lined up. I had $2,000 in my pocket, which I saved up, which went really fast, by the way. But, I was like, I'm just going to go for it. If I fail, I fail, but I'm going to go for it.
And what is the best advice that was given to you? I think you mentioned it about Mr. Thomas. What was the best advice that he kept you that it still sticks to you to this day that you keep remembering and you keeps motivating you?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if there was one specific piece of advice. He was just very encouraging and very supportive, and he taught me a lot of stuff. Um, I don't know that if there was one piece of advice that, like, was like my guiding lantern or whatever. It was just more like, I have people like Mr. Thomas, who's a professional artist, telling me that I'm really good. So I'm just gonna keep at it.
And now you're working on or you've already finished, or you're still working on the collaborative book? Because that's one of the key things that I wanted to talk about was all those authors and illustrators that you had into creating that book. Um,
Well,
how was
that's
that
another.
process?
Sorry, but yeah, that was another thing. It's like if you keep at something, you can enter that field eventually, and eventually they'll take you seriously. First, they're like, "Oh, you're the young buck," you know, why should I like waste my time on you? But just keep at it. And what I'm doing now is I'm doing an anthology book. It's called The Never Dead, but I have 14 authors in there. Some are fairly big names in like the indie horror circuit, and the way I got them is just like, some of them like submit to magazines and I illustrate the stories of magazines. And then I have a podcast called Skill Sessions Podcast. I interview them so they kind of know who I am, and then after a while, I'm like, hey man, I will give you an original illustration I did for one of your stories in this magazine in exchange for a story for, my anthology. And a lot of them did that. In fact, nobody was really nasty about it. Some people were just like, oh man, I'm really busy at the moment. But plenty of people submitted, and so far it's worked out great. And it's like the more that you get done, the more people notice. So like every time that I do an illustration, because every story I'm doing an illustration for. So every illustration I put up on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and TikTok and all that sort of stuff. And just try and get it out there, try and get like draw more eyes on it.
So then that's two different, I guess, two different phases or questions that I have now is like the importance, one, of collaboration, and one, the importance of like being out there on social media. A lot of artists don't like being on social media. They like to keep to themselves and, put things out where they're at. But like now it's like such a digital space, right? So it's like, what do you think about the importance of being on digital platforms and then the importance of collaboration?
Well, I think first of all, collaboration. The thing is like the more like artists love to get out there. They love to be in the spotlight. They love for people to talk them up. And once you have like any scene going, they love to be part of it because it helps push them forward. I mean, I think that's probably an all artist thing. Is like musicians like to be in tours with like bigger bands. Um, it, artists love to work with like great authors and so on. So collaboration helps, but especially collaboration where it's going to get more eyes on your work. Not to be like real mercenary about it, but it is going to get more eyes on your work. So like I don't I try not to pick anybody that I don't think is going to be quality at all. But definitely it helps if they do some stuff that you really like, and then you got to promote it. I'm an artist, and it's funny. People kind of joke about it sometimes, but like I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube. You got to get it out there. I mean, how people like I wrote 3 books, and they're all like doing all right, but they weren't doing great. I was like, how do I get myself out there more? I started like I do book trailers. I would like um do all sorts of podcasts. Like I would just try and get out there as much as possible, and that really does. Eventually, it adds up. Like I think a lot of people think like if the first one or two doesn't really spark something off, that they just give up on it. But it's that thing where you got to keep at it.
If you can be that avenue for somebody who's getting started in the same industry with all the experience that you have and all the things that you've done, what would you tell that person who's barely getting started? How would you kind of navigate them through the process of, one, for sure not giving up, but then also the things that they should maybe avoid, maybe things that you ran into as far as mistakes that you learned from? What would you guide somebody through?
Well, you've got to take criticism. And I mean, you could even take it like as in like you got to not take it personal. So even if it sounds like really harsh, if everybody is telling you the same thing, it's probably true. So if they say this is how you're screwing up your artwork or your writing or whatever, if everyone is mentioning the same thing, then take a hard look at it, see what needs to change, what's going to make it better. But you gotta keep working. So like I've done paintings where like I'll do like 30 hours into it, and then I'm like, it's just not going anywhere. So out of frustration, I'll like rip it off the canvas and throw it away. But I'll start another project. Like I'm not. It's not like that was my one shot. I give up.
And then it takes a lot of that. It takes a lot of you. Like it's not going to be like the first one's not going to be the golden ticket. Like it has to be
Right.
like a bunch of projects and a bunch of them. And so with that, I guess what skills have you really learned to develop? What skills have you really saw that like it makes things a little bit more easier for you to navigate yourself, things that like for sure are a priority to do rather than like, trying to do a lot of different stuff that might not be of a priority. What are those things?
I think probably the best is like find people that you admire, find what they do, and don't copy them, but try and see how they accomplish what they accomplish. It's like and I guess for everything, like I tattoo, like I've been tattooing 23 years now. I still look up to people. I'm like, oh, what'd you do there? Oh, what needle grouping did you use? So I'll ask them all these technical questions. With like I've been writing since 2011, but like I still listen to seminars. I did like a Alan Moore seminar. I did a Stephen King seminar. Like I'm interested in what they have to say. It doesn't matter whether you agree with them 100%, but at least hear them out.
It's the opportunity of like keeping on learning and keeping on educating yourself. A
Right.
person with like I think like I always think about like 100% with like 100 years of experience, 70 years of experience, they still don't know everything, and there's still something that they can learn. So
Right.
I feel like as long as you're willing to learn, it's something that you.
Well, and the people who think that they are masters of something probably aren't. Like everybody's really good, whether it's tattooing or writing or drawing or whatever. They will all tell you like, yeah, I'm all right. Yeah. I like my stuff. I need to work on this, and like they'll be very humble about it, even when they're like a master.
I completely agree, and it's that somebody always has something to learn. What is some
Yeah.
of the things that like that if I guess if you weren't doing what you were doing right now, what is something that you would love to keep doing or love to try out to do?
I'm not doing well. I've been lucky, like pretty much everything that I really want to participate in. I mean, one thing that kind of derailed me is I was really into like I have too many hobbies, so I was really into MMA. Like I'm a second degree black belt in Taekwondo. I won the gold medal at the Virginia State Championships. I was like, that's going to be my big thing. And then I saw the first UFC. I was like, oh, I need to learn more. So then I started learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I started learning Muay Thai. Then I had brain cancer. So, by the time all that was done, I was too old. So I couldn't, to be a professional athlete, you have to be like a certain age, and I was like, yeah, okay. But, that's probably for the best because, my favorite is really writing and drawing. So I can't say I have no regrets whatsoever, but I don't think things worked out badly.
No, I have two final questions. The first one is going to be kind of like a closing tradition that we usually do now is what is something that you would like to know or something that you would like to ask our next guest? And a lot of the guests that we have are either creative people, educators, or people in the creative industry. So it's like, what is a question that you would love to ask out to a different guest or something that you would like to know about?
Well, I'll start with what I'd like to know. What I'd like to know is, just because you get criticism, even if it's negative criticism, it's probably going to help you along. It's going to make you better. So you've got to listen to it. Like, even when it sounds kind of harsh, take it as like, does it make me better or not how it came at me. As far as what I like to know is like what works for other people. Like, like as an author, I'm like, what promotion worked best for you? What editor worked best for you? If it's like an artist, like I still follow, like if I think somebody's a great painter, I look at what they do. Like Steve Jones was talking about, like when he lays out, he uses a certain type of paint. I was like, oh, that's great. I'll try that. So you got to look at what other people are doing.
And to tell me about the projects you're doing now. This is where I kind of want for you to give yourself a plug as far as like, what you're working on right now, who you're doing it with, the collaborations, things like that. What is it that you hope to achieve with it?
Well, definitely check out my book, The Never Dead. I painted the cover, I painted the back cover, I did illustration for every story. I'm doing like little goofy caricatures of each author, to lighten up, get a little bit of brevity. There are a lot of illustrations in there, and I felt like like with every project, I feel like you have to go to it 110%. And, even if it doesn't make it, think it's going to. And if it doesn't make it, you're like, then you go on to the next one.
Absolutely. And anybody who wants to go and check out that book or follow you, where can they reach out to you? Where can they follow you and things like that?
Well, my website is danhenk.com. I'm Dead Guy LC on like Facebook and Instagram. I'm Dan Henk on TikTok. But once the book comes out, it'll be everywhere. It'll be on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. I'll probably advertise a lot on like Facebook and Instagram. Those two of my primary social media outlets.
Well, what is the book mostly about? Like, can you give us like a little insight into what it is?
Well, back in the day, what I really loved is like the Outer Limits and Twilight Zones. It's not like straight up horror. It's like horror with like a cool plot, like cool developments and kind of like stuff you didn't think of. You're like, oh wow, I didn't think it was going to go there. So I remember telling everybody that's kind of what I was thinking. I was like, I'm a big fan of Lovecraft. I'm a big fan of Twilight Zone. Big fan of the Outer Limits. Do whatever you want, but I would like you to was along those lines. And there were actually a couple authors where I was like, yeah, man, it really doesn't fit. So I just turned them down.
How was that a little bit like to work in a team of different artists and creatives and illustrators and authors, things like that? A lot of times like creatives, they like to be, their ideas going through. How was it when you were working through with a collaborative team as far as like giving each other feedback?
Well, it's not feedback as in like, they get my story, I get their story. It's like there are a couple people I send my story out to. I have two stories actually in the book, and so I send my stories out to them. And I did an extensive edit on everyone's story. I don't like editors who try to rewrite it, just more for like grammar and and flow and so on. And then they would send me back their story and approve or tell me why they did what they did. And so we went back and forth. It was all pretty civil. It was pretty cool. I think I had a little bit because my book, and they know me from doing illustrations for their stories. So I think I had a little bit of trust built up there.
That's really awesome. And so they can go and get your book through the website.
Yeah. Well, danhenk.com is my website, so it'll definitely be, on there, probably like front page, but it'll be everywhere. Amazon, Kobo, Barnes and Nobles,
That is awesome. That is
every
awesome.
platform.
Yeah. And so wait, I had like one very last question that I kind of just thought about was when you're drawing and you're coming up with these illustrations, what do you base them off of? What are like, how do you create your pieces and your artwork? What are you drawing when you're creating them?
That's a good question. I think one thing that really, because I've read a ton of books, like we'd be like, stationed little army bases everywhere, and we had no TV. So I just go to the library and I check out this whole stack of books and I have it all read within a week. And what really bugged me is when there'd be a cover that fooled you. Like you'd read the book, you're like, that's nowhere in the book. That has nothing to do with the story. So what I do is I read each story and I find the scene that I think would make the best illustration from it. And then I try and draw something up based off that scene. And often I will send it to the author and I'll say, hey, what do you think? And there were a couple where they'll just like, well, I had this more in mind. I was like, okay, and I change it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so then I appreciate you coming on to the podcast. I appreciate you coming on to the episode. Is there any last things that you would like to share about kind of your experience growing up as an artist, the things that you've done or things that are upcoming?
I would just say keep at it. If you think like, if you think you got it, don't listen to other people. Just go for it. Like try and get it out there. What's the worst that's gonna happen? And that's pretty much it. But thank you for having me on your podcast. Thanks for helping me promote my book.